Okay, so we're gonna move on. We're gonna cover FICRA, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and then we're also gonna cover what came later, uh, which is FACTA, the Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act. Right? We're gonna cover those two really fast, light. All right. So let's start with the Fair Credit Reporting Act, FICRA. So as we talked about before, this act came in around the 1970s. It gives us consumer rights, and one of those consumer rights was we can get as soon as we get denied, we get a adverse action letter, or it's called the adverse action notice. We get a consumer credit report, consumer credit score. We get to dispute any inaccuracies or incompleteness on that report. And we can also have the right to limit pre-screen offers. And then we talk about, the credit scores versus credit report. Credit report is the history of your accounts, how good you pay when you open it. And credit score is the ability that you have to pay on time. That's what credit score is. All right, so on this adverse letter, let's talk about the adverse action notice. All right, so you're gonna get this letter on the mail. Boom, you got denied in writing. It's gonna have information about you. Your name, address, stuff like that. How much was the loan? And on that letter, he also is gonna give you a time limit to go ahead and request your credit report. And that time limit is 60 days. So 60 days is the time limit to request your credit report once you were denied. Consumer credit agency obligations. So the reporting agencies, Equifax, TransUnion, Expedient, they got a couple of obligations, and this came up in 2018. They said, "Wait a minute, let's get out of hand." They came out with another amendment to the regulation. Okay, so the amendment was with regard of fraud alerts and credit freezes and protecting credit records of minors. That's what that change came about in 2018. So let's talk about some of the changes. So when those banks that you didn't pay reported you negatively to those agencies, it used to stay there forever. Now they put limits. So if it's a negative information in your credit from whoever, it stays 7 years. With exception, that is if it's a criminal conviction. There's no limit for criminal conviction if it's reported to your credit bureaus. Bankruptcies stays 10 years, and then they come off. If they don't come off, you report. You request your credit for free once a year or once every 12 months. You look at it, you be like, wait a minute, gotta come off. So you call them, send them a letter, make sure it comes off. They're not supposed to do that. They're not supposed to show the next lender over 10 years on that record if it's a bankruptcy. And they also they also got the obligation to give us the opportunity for us to say, wait a minute, let me put an alert that somebody's stealing my identity. So This is an update on this rule. If you put on a fraud alert, it's called initial fraud alert, it stays in the record for 1 year. And then you can also extend it and it stays for 7 years. So that's another consumer right, you know. You put these alerts. If you suspect that somebody's stealing your identity, you put a initial fraud alert for 1 year, and you put extended one, and it stays for 7 years. The only thing that is negative about it is that when you apply for a loan and you leave it like that for that long, 7 years, a year, whatever, it's going to take a while to get the credit approved, because they have to go through, you know, different steps to make sure you is you. They also came out with some disclosures, and that's the summary of consumer rights. You know, when you apply for a loan, they have to give you some disclosures: the summary of consumer rights, and the summary of consumer identity theft rights, and the notice of national security freeze right. And so now we got the initial fraud alert 1 year, and then we got the extended one. So you got the initial, you can convert into extended, and that stays 7 years. But you can also freeze it. So what's the difference between the two? When you the initial fraud alert or the extended fraud alert, the loan company have to take extra steps to make sure you is you. They might call you and they say, "Hey, give me more information, more IDs, more addresses, you know, stuff like that." Like they have to make sure that you is you. When you put a freeze, though, however, on the other hand, if you put a freeze, then you have to give him permission to whoever is requesting your credit report in writing. You give him permission in writing to go ahead. So they go hand to hand. But freeze, you give him permission, the initial alert and the extended, they do the steps. Capiche? All right, so now let's get into the FAIR Act. The Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act, FACT Act, right? That's what it's called. The Federal and Accurate Credit Transaction Act. So this is an amendment to FCRA, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, FCRA. This is an amendment, an addition to the other one, to FCRA. And this is specifically talking about identity theft. In 2002, there was over 10 million people that suffer identity theft. So they came out with this amendment in 2003. And it's got several provisions to prevent identity theft. You know, and this is self-explanatory. You just think about it a little bit, and then if you see that on the test, you're gonna catch it. But make sure that you know that this is specifically for identity theft. And some of those provisions to remember is identity theft prevention and credit history restoration. Those are some of the provisions, and you can get more into it on the FAIR Act, on the FACT Act, the Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act. You can also improve in use of consumer access to credit information. You can enhance the accuracy of the consumer report information. You can limit the sharing with the medical field. You can limit that sharing with the medical field. And then they also came out with educational stuff for the consumer, not to get your identity stolen. That's what we're talking about. And then protecting employee for misconduct investigations. So, and remember, the Fair Credit Reporting Act is not only about loans or credit, it's also about insurance and employment. So because this is an amendment to that one, fact Act, it also covers employee misconduct. So, I mean, we both work for the same company. If I stole your identity because I got access to your stuff, that's an employee misconduct. And this provision, this act, this amendment, provide us with a protection. And of course, the violator with a punishment. And retaliation of state laws. So when you get access, let's talk about access to credit reports. And as we talked about before, you can go ahead and request, once you get denied, you can request your credit report, but now under this act, Title V, the credit score might be disclosed to you for the feed. So now they can charge you if you want to know your credit score. There is there is an exception, and that's when you apply for mortgage. It's up to the loan officers to go ahead and give it to you for free or disclose it back to you. But the report, they have to give it to you, but not the credit score. And if not, you just go ahead and contact the bureaus, and you got up to 12 months. You can get it once a year or every 12 months for free. And we talk about fraud alerts and freezes and the differences. Just to recap, the initial fraud alert 1 year, the extended fraud alert 7 years, stays in your records, and the freeze, you can go ahead and turn on and off whenever you want. And the last thing we're going to talk about is the credit cards and debit cards numbers being disclosed. They used a word, it's called truncation of credit cards and debit cards. Truncation is nothing else but cutting, deleting, blacking out, truncate, taking out the numbers on a credit card or debit card. That's what we're talking about. Truncating the numbers. So they're only allowed to show 5 numbers. Once they run that credit card and they give you a receipt, you look at it, and it should be no more than 5 numbers on the credit card receipt. So that's another provision they came out with, another law, another rule, that these companies, whoever it is that's running your credit card, it cannot show more than 5 numbers if it's electronic. If they're using, which I haven't seen that in like many years. Old machine, when you go put the credit card and you go, they're still using that, whoever that is. Well, all your numbers is going to show up. I won't. Me personally, I will not do business with those guys if they still got those machines, unless the security can went through and no lights out. It's a very high security breach if you let somebody do that. Keep all your data. And lastly, under this act, the FACT Act, Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act, Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act, FACT Act. They came out with a security and disposal. So, how do you dispose your clients, or how you want to know how they dispose and keep your information? You went in there, you applied, you got denied, you're like, oh man, and you leave and you fucking come back. Next thing you know is, wait a minute, what happened to my information that I was given? All my personal information, my social security number, all that. They're supposed to destroy it by either burning it or shredding it. And if it's electronic file, they're supposed to destroy it by erasing it electronically, but making sure that it's a special program or somehow that you cannot recover it or reconstruct the file that it was deleted. And another thing is, while they're working on the file, they put it in a file, boom, boom. They just don't leave that your file, your personal information on top of the desk and leave and then come back the next day. They're supposed to put it in a file cabinet and lock it after the work day. So we're going to talk about more, not to get confused, and other rules in this business, how long you're supposed to keep the files and blah, 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 blah. No. This is strictly FACTA, identity theft. What are the steps that you want to take to secure that consumer's personal information? And got to do with none of that, how long you're going to keep it, no. How you're going to destroy those files after the time elapsed. So this is all about identity theft. The steps that you're taking to safeguard the information given and who you're giving it to. If you keep that in mind, that's what FACTA is. The Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. One was the Fair Credit Reporting Act was in 1970, followed by this amendment in 2003. So do not get it confused, muchachón.